Hi, I'm Tiana Shoei. I'm a writer, entrepreneur, leader, and energy. This is my podcast, Ain't Quite Right. Join me as we laugh, learn, and live big. Hello, everyone. This is Tiana Shoei, and welcome to my podcast, Tiana Shoei Ain't Quite Right. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Episode 7. And episode 7 is part 2 of a 2-part series focused on the topic of habit. So in part 1, we talked about why habits matter, what habits are. And in part 2, we're going to talk about becoming aware of your habits and then structuring your habits so they lead you into the life of your dreams. Now, before we get started into today's topic, just want to do a quick reminder. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. So part 1 is episode 6. And if you have not listened to episode 6, I suggest you stop, go back, listen to episode 6 before you dive in with me to episode 7 today. And more importantly, if you have not listened to episodes 4 and 5 about vision, stop what you're doing before you listen to this. Go back and listen to episodes 4, 5, and 6, and then join me on this episode. Now, the reason why I continue to reinforce the fact that you wanna listen to episodes 4 and 5 before listening to habit is because in today's episode, we're going to get into what you can do to restructure your habits towards the life of your dreams. Here's the problem. If you don't know where you're going, you will have a fuzzy concept of what habits you need to change. Now, all of us off the top of our heads can think of habits we need to stop doing or doing, right? Maybe it's that soda you drink every day and you probably shouldn't be drinking, all that sugar or all of that food coloring, all those chemicals in soda. Or maybe it's that 4th cup of coffee you have every day and you really only need the first 1 or 2. Whatever it is, I'm sure all of us can think off the top of our heads of habits we need to structure. But going back to the quote that we used in the last episode, you don't decide your future. Your habits decide your future, and you decide your habits. To be very intentional and to make good decisions about the habits that you want to continue to reinforce and those habits that you want to mold into something a little bit healthier, you need to have a clear understanding of where you're going, what your vision for your life is. And I just want to stress that again. You can run enthusiastically in the wrong direction. And that is a quote that I learned from an author that has taught me so many irreplaceable principles, and that is Keith Cunningham. And I learned so much from Keith, A, by listening to him in podcasts, but B, by reading his book, The Road Less Stupid. And what Keith has taught me is the most invaluable habit. And it's, by the way, the habit that I started off in episode 1 with, which is my morning routine of thinking time. Keith has taught me the value of thinking and asking yourself meaningful questions. In fact, I can say today, I had one of the best thinking time sessions I've ever had, because what I forced myself to do is, this is, by the way, my 1-year anniversary since I opened my business Curador. And this podcast, by the way, is brought to you by my business Curador. And I sat down and I asked myself, okay, what went well over the past year? What didn't go so well? What did you learn? What have you accomplished over the past year? And I sat down and had this really great thinking time session, but I'll tell you the questions that really challenged me the most. When I'm looking at my future vision, I asked myself, what would be considered failure? And then what decisions could I make that would lead me towards failure? And what decisions can I make that would lead me towards success? And what does success look like for me as far as the dreams and goals and vision that I have for my life and for my business Curador and for the work that I get to do with SubroSmart? It was an absolutely refreshing and amazing time where you sit down. I set my timer for an hour and I just sat down and I asked myself tough questions like that. And Keith Cunningham is the one who's taught me to learn to ask good questions. And that's what the vision practice is about, is learning to ask yourself questions so you have crystal clarity on what it is you want for your life. And it's so important to do that. So that is why I recommend starting off with vision before we get here. Now, before we also get into the topic of habit, I want to talk about something really important. I'm going to ask you guys a question. So here's the question I have for you before we start off this podcast. Do you love your life? Now, before you answer that question, I want to clarify what I mean. I'm not asking, do you have a perfect life? I'm not asking, is your life everything you want it to be? I'm not asking if you have a a life that doesn't have challenges. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you, do you love your life? Do you love what you do? Have you found your life's purpose? And are you waking up every day excited to do the things that you have set before you? Or do you find yourself working through life out of a sense of obligation or because this is the pattern that you believe you're supposed to follow? Do you love your life? Are you living your life? Or are you living somebody else's life? That is why my motto for this podcast is let's laugh, learn, and live big. Because my goal and my ultimate desire for everybody who's listening to any of my podcast episodes, or if you read my blog, my goal and my desire for you is that you learn to love your life. And by the way, I believe that love is a decision, just like I believe happiness is a decision. But in order to love your life and in order to be happy, you have to know that when you lay your head on your pillow every night, that you have done the best work that day that you could do, that the best version of you showed up for that life. And so that is why I create these podcasts and I have these conversations with you, because I genuinely want you to love your life. And what I have learned over the past year and the journey that I am on and will be on the rest of my life is that life is not as formulaic as we think it is. In other words, we're taught a certain formula through society as to this is how you live a good life. You go, you get educated, you work a job, you balance your finances, you have healthy relationships, you eat healthy food. While none of those things are necessarily wrong per se, our lives don't have to be as formulaic as we are taught that they are. The world is such a big place and it's full of so much opportunity. This is why I'm an avid reader, because I do not want to allow my biases, the things that I've been taught, to shape my future if they aren't true. And your beliefs, by the way, are a choice. What you believe is a choice. And so if you believe that there's only one way to live a successful, healthy, fulfilling life, you are choosing that belief. And what I hope to do is inspire you to identify any areas in your life where you have accepted less than the best for yourself, where you are compromising on core parts of who you are, core parts of your values, because you are under the misconception or the misnomer or the belief that this is the only way. I'm hoping to help you challenge that, because I had to go through that journey myself. And I had to learn to face my fears. I had to learn to be uncomfortable. I had to learn to be honest with myself. If you were to take me, say 3 years ago, before I really began to embark on this journey with intentionality, right? I've always unintentionally kind of stumbled on these things. I talked about in the last podcast how I stumbled upon the lifestyle of being an athletically fit person. I wasn't intentionally thinking when I turn in, when I'm a 40 or 50 or 60-year-old woman, I want to make sure I still have all this mobility. I was just thinking I need something to do with my time and energy, right? But now that I'm more intentional and I think more holistically about my life and about the journey of my life, I have come to realize that I had so many misnomers and so many misunderstandings about life. I had an unhealthy work-life balance. I didn't have the healthiest relationships in my life. I had an unhealthy perspective of myself. I was lying to myself about myself. And by the way, those lies go two ways. So some of those lies were not admitting some of the things in my life that I was capable of. I way underestimated my own potential. And by the way, I would dare say most of you also underestimate your own potential. One of the topics we're going to talk about a lot in future episodes is insecurity. Every person I know struggles with insecurity. Everybody. Nobody is exempt from it. But what's funny about insecurity is most of our insecurity is embedded in lies that we tell ourselves. So I lived under a cloud of insecurity, believing lies about myself. But I also was not being honest with myself about some of the flaws that I had to grow through, because I was so insecure. I was masking my insecurity with ego. And what I've learned to do is free myself from those things. So ego doesn't make my decisions. So insecurity doesn't drive my life any longer. Rather, courage, discipline, and humility are the three principles, along with learning, which I believe is kind of the centerfold piece of those three components. Learning, the courage, the discipline, and the humility, and letting learning drive my life. I've come to realize that I I lied to myself about who I was. I lied to myself about what I was capable of. I lied to myself about the work-life balance and the compromises I had to make in order to put a roof over my head. And I think so many of us do that unintentionally. Now, if your dream life is to work a 9 to 5, to save for retirement, travel, whatever your dream life looks like, I don't want to, as I'm breaking kind of through some of the misnomers that I had in my life, I don't want to criticize or condemn or ridicule what you have chosen for your dream life. That's why I'm very hesitant to talking too much about my dream life, because I don't want my life to become the example for your life. In other words, I want to show you principles. I want to teach you things that can help set you free. But my life should look very different than your life. What I value, what I dream of should be very different than yours. So I try to stay away from my own personal preferences because I don't want to shape your thinking. But what I would love to do is see who you are really emerge as a person. And the reason that I started with this, do you love your life, when we're talking about habits, is because the work that it takes to have healthy habits in your life is going to require some sacrifice. It's going to require some work, and it's going to require some motivation. And that motivation should be that you can love your life. You can wake up every day excited to go tackle the world in front of you. And for some of us, it's shifting the way we think about things. It's our habits of thought. Some of us, it's our physical habits. Some of us, it's just becoming aware, intentional thinking. So that's why I cover all these topics in such a broad array, is because we're all different. We're all in a different place in our journey. I learned a lot about this reading the book, The Courage to be Disliked. And in the book, which is a breakdown of Adlerian psychology and Socratic philosophy, the authors break down this concept of there are no vertical relationships. And we think so vertically about life because we all have or are all subject to people in authority in our lives, right? I mean, even if you're the CEO of a company, we still have authority over our lives, be it law enforcement or the president of the United States or whatever it looks like. But what that has done is that's damaged our ability to understand that we really are on horizontal planes as far as the way our journey of life goes. And some of us are just at different places in our life. And so I try to be conscientious of the fact that you are in a different place in your life than I am. But we're on a journey of living our lives. And I hope to inspire as many people as possible to truly live their life because, and I hate to be cliche, but I'm going to be cliche, YOLO, you only live once, right? And that isn't an excuse to make poor decisions. On the contrary, it's an excuse to create a life of structure and discipline. Discipline equals freedom. So you can have freedom to truly YOLO, live your life, right? So I want to go back and just quickly recap on episode 6, which was part 1 of the habit, and then we'll jump into the meat of today's session. So in episode 6, I reminded everyone why habits matter. You don't decide your future. Your habits decide your future, and you decide your habits. So that was kind of the key takeaway from that and why habits matter. And I kind of went through all of that. I'm not going to rehash that. But for today's topic, this is the quote I want to resonate with everybody that's listening. This is the real power of habit. The insight that your habits are what you choose them to be. And that's from Charles Duhigg. And actually, Charles Duhigg is the author of The Power of Habit, which is the book that inspired a lot of what we're going to talk about today. That book really helped shape my understanding of how habits work. As I said before, in 2-part series, there's no possible way for me to cover all of the material on habits. But the idea of this is just to begin to bring awareness to our habits. And then in the future, we're going to talk about more ways that you can identify your true self, your purpose, learn to live that out, learn to love your life. And these are all the steps in that process. I'm being very methodical in the way that I choose the material and lay it out because I do believe that there's an awakening that has to come. There's a part of you that needs to reawaken to the child that you were and see the world of wonder around you. And it's interesting because the more that I learn about how to learn and the more that I learn about how to produce unique and creative work, the more that every author and every intellectual and every professor that I learn from goes back to the fact that we need to reconnect with who we were as children. And I talk about that in the vision practice. Think like the child that you were, that have those dreams, have those hopes, have those ambitions. The highest form of learning is learning to unlearn. And so we're going to learn to unlearn some of the bad habits we've picked up in life. This is the real power of habit, the insight that your habits are what you choose them to be. All right, so now let's get into the meat of today's session. Habits. Some of them, well, let me rephrase this. Most of your habits you don't think about anymore. Your brain is highly developed, as I mentioned, and Charles Duhigg does a great job talking about your basal ganglia and how habits are stored into that part of your brain and how hardwired your body is to, or your brain and your neurology as well as your psychology, to put everything into a habit loop as much as possible. So the first thing that we've got to do is learn to bring awareness to our habits. Now, there's a couple different things that you can do to bring awareness to your habits, but I strongly recommend, and I'm going to say this over and over again, while I like to introduce principles, how you execute those principles is really up to you because you're a unique individual. This is a really key principle to understand. When it comes to bringing awareness to your habits and identifying what your habits are, there is no replacement for a pen and a piece of paper. There is no replacement for that. So what I did when I personally started to become aware of my habits, and I learned this actually even before reading Charles' book, The Power of Habit. I actually learned it from listening to Darren Hardy's book, The Compound Effect. And he gave this formula in the book that I thought was really profound, and I just want to quickly share it with you. Luck equals preparation, which is your personal growth, plus your attitude, which is your mindset, plus opportunity, plus action, which are your choices and your habits. So your luck equals preparation, attitude, opportunity, plus action. In other words, luck is a fallacy in some ways. I mean, obviously some of us are just lucky, but generally luck manifests itself because you've been prepared, you have the right mindset, you see the opportunity before you, and you have the right habits, the choices that lead you towards that luck, right? So the first and most important thing is becoming aware of your habits. And you become aware of your habits, again, piece of paper and a pen. And the reason for that is there's a lot of science that shows that when you write something down, you create a stronger mind connection than when you type it out. I know in today's digital age, we're all tempted to type things out, but there have been many research studies shown even when you're listening, if you're typing notes, you're retaining less if you're typing than you are writing. And the point of this exercise is to bring your habits to your frontal awareness. Get them to so that your reticular activation system is paying attention to them and not simply just going through the motions. If you've ever gotten in your car and driven somewhere that you routinely drive to, maybe it's work, your kid's daycare, whatever it looks like, and you get there and you think to yourself, I didn't even think about how I got here. You just instinctually do it. That's because that's all stored in habit. So the first thing that I did when I was learning to become aware of my habits is I started keeping track of how I spent my time. Now, in the notes for today's episode, I've actually created a link. So you'll see in the description, it's also on my website at tianashoei.com resources. There's a category that says podcast, and I have podcast notes. I have actually put together a worksheet that I use to track my time, and it's just blocks of time. And you can go in there and just write down what you're doing to become aware of how often you pick up your phone, maybe how often you eat something, how often you drink something, what you're doing with your time. Begin to bring awareness. Now, if you are thinking to yourself, I am not going to sit down and write down everything I do all day long, you can't measure or you can't analyze what you don't measure, and you have to be able to sit down and analyze that. If that's too much for you, and that's okay. For some people, that's going to be too much. For me, it was the only way for me to have a really honest assessment of how I was spending my time, which, by the way, I am doing that again. I have reinstalled that habit in my life of writing everything down because I'm re-implementing my habits after having a little bit of time where everything got derailed in my life, and I'm now putting my habits back in place one at a time. So in order to make sure that I'm staying on track, I'm writing everything down I do. And it's a simple little calendar I've included in the link if you want to download that and use it. You're welcome to it. It's something that I'm giving all my listeners just because I want to help empower you to become aware of this. So you just sit down and you write down what you're doing, and you just keep a little notebook with you, and you sit down and you write down the time and what you did, write down the time and what you did. And then you'll begin to see patterns, and you'll think, wow, every day at around 3:00, I go and do this. Or I didn't realize that I spent so much time on my phone from 8 to 9 o'clock, or whatever the pattern is for you. If that is more than you can manage, then I want you to pick just a single area in your life that you want to improve. So let me go back and give you the categories when we talk about vision, and these same categories apply to your habits. What are your habits for your finances, relationships, your spiritual life, your recreation, your career, and your physical health, or your health? I shouldn't even just say physical, your mental health, your spiritual health, your emotional health, your health. Pick one category. For me, once I got off of the habit of having to write down everything that I was doing, I focus specifically on finances, and I carry around a little notebook and I write down everything that I spend all the time, 100% of the time, period. By picking something and just writing it down all the time, maybe it's your time on your phone. Write down every time you pick up your phone. You bring awareness to that particular habit. So just to recap what I just said, I suggest that you get a piece of paper and you start writing down your habits. There's 2 ways you can go about implementing that. You can download the sheet that I gave you, or you can keep your own notebook, whatever you want, and write down what you're doing all day, every day. Seems like a lot. It seems cumbersome, but I can tell you both from personal experience and also that of other people who've shared their insights that they've gained from this practice. This is something I've read from multiple sources. This is a very, very practical and important step when you're ready to truly delve into restructuring your life. You're going to have to come to this point at some point anyway. But for some of you, I realize that that's a lot of work to write down what you're doing all day, every day. So for those of you that's more than you're ready to bite off and chew, and by the way, start small and build in. I talked about that in the last episode, so it's okay if you're not ready to go that deep. Then just pick one habit that you want to focus on. Your finances, your health, whatever it is out of those categories, or even a category I did not list. So maybe I'm missing something in your life that's important to you. Write it down every day when you do it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start to analyze those habits. So that way you can identify what habits in your life are leading you towards your vision and what habits are taking you down a path that is way detracting from your vision. So once you have analyzed your habit, be it the single habit or all of your habits, we're just going to focus on one habit at a time. And I talked about this again in the last episode. If you try to change too much too soon, you're ineffective. And I love this analogy. Rachel Hollis taught me this analogy, and I want to just share this with you. If you're trying to make a big impact in your life, it's always better to start off with one thing and put all your energy into one thing. Again, Gary Keller in his book, The One Thing, really reassures us, reinforces this idea. But if you, to understand the analogy, I want you to imagine that you want to make one big, huge wake in an ocean, right? Or in a lake or a pond, okay? You want to make the biggest impact you can. You have 2 options before you. You can take a handful of pebbles and you can throw them into the water, or you can take one big boulder and throw it into the water. Which is going to make the biggest splash? Obviously, the big boulder. So the same is true for when you're trying to change habits in your life. If you try to do too many too soon, you're going to throw them into the water and you're going to have a much lower impact on the overall result. If you do one thing and you just build off of that, what Gary Keller calls the domino effect, just build one habit and build from there, you get momentum. And Darren Hardy talks about this in the compound effect. You flywheel momentum. And once momentum builds up, things build on themselves and they go. And I can tell you personally, having lost that momentum because I had some personal setbacks, which I talked about in my blog in September, having to regain that momentum is a lot of work. So I always suggest one thing at a time. Even somebody like me who had my habits so perfectly laid out, even reinforcing those, I just had to start at one at a time. So I want you just to pick one thing from your list. If you were recording everything that you want to change, or if you just focused on one thing. Now let's talk about how we address and identify those habits. Now in his book, The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg does a great job helping us understand how our brains work. Habits are triggered because there's a cue. There's something that triggers the habit in our brain. And then from that, our brains are wired to take the trigger, do a routine, and then we have a reward set up for that. So that's how our brains store things into habits. Cue, routine, reward. Let me give you just a simple example every single person on this planet can associate with. Cue, hunger. You feel hunger. So guess what that does? That triggers a routine to go get food. You eat and you get the reward of having your blood sugar raise or whatever it is that, you usually might get a little dopamine rush from that. You get the sensation of a full stomach, your energy levels increase. The cue is hunger, the routine is to eat, and the reward are all the benefits that come from eating. This is the general pattern that your brain follows with every single habit that you have. You may not realize it, and you may not have a lot of awareness of this particular cycle that's happening in your brain, but this is what habits are. They are a cue, a routine, and a reward. So in order to identify what the cues are, what the triggers are in your habits, you've got to pay attention to a few key things. So let's say as you're looking at this, you say, okay, I want my habit of how I spend my money to be better, or I want my habit of what I do from 3 to 3:30 to be better, because in his book, Charles Duhigg talks about the habit he had of going down to the cafeteria and eating a cookie every day, and how he paid attention to the cue. So the things that you look for to identify what your triggers are is what the time of day is, who the people are around you, what your emotional state is at the time, and what was the immediate preceding action that triggered that habit. So I'm going to go through that list again. The 4 things that you want to pay attention to when you're trying to identify what the cues are, what's triggering your habits, are the time of day, the people that are around you, your emotional state, and your immediately preceding action. Okay, so let's talk about frivolous spending money, okay? This was a habit of mine that I had to break. And I broke, by the way, by writing down everything I spend and paying attention and putting awareness and conscientiousness into how I was spending my money. So I would look at, when I wrote down my habit of when I spent money, I'd say, okay, what time of day is it? You know, who are the people around me? What is my emotional state? And what is my immediately preceding action? And I found my habit loop for getting on Amazon, clicking on that button, getting the little dopamine rush from the buy, and then my reward was that dopamine rush, both from the buying and then when the box showed up at my front door. So then I had to become aware that, I'm more likely to frivolously buy on Amazon during this time of the afternoon when I'm around these people or by myself, after I've just had a hard phone call or a hard meeting. And my immediate preceding action was the meeting. So it allowed me to say, these are the cues, these are the triggers that are triggering this habit. Not all habits are bad, by the way. Sometimes you want to reinforce these things. For example, the cue, routine, reward. Your alarm goes off, you get out of bed. The reward is that you're awake and you now can start your day, right? Not every habit is bad. So you want to use this both to identify your positive habits as well as those habits that need reshaping. Now, here's the most important thing about habits, and I said this again earlier. You can't really get rid of a habit. You have to replace it. Your brain is going to constantly be looking for that cue, routine, reward. So what you can do is, as you're identifying habits that are what we call bad habits, or habits that are not leading you in the direction of of the life that you truly want for yourself, what you want to do is you want to come up with a list of those habits that you have in your life that are good, healthy habits, and those habits that you have in your life that are not as healthy as they could be for you. And you want to find a way to replace those not so healthy habits with new habits that are healthier. So you want to replace those with healthier habits. And in order to do that, again, you have to have vision. You have to know where you're going, but then you have to sit down and do a thinking time session. So here's your thinking time session. After you have spent at least a week recording your single habit or your list of habits, I want you to sit down and then write down all the habits. Thinking time session, minimum of 30 minutes, quiet, put your phone off, take your watch off, set a timer, get a piece of paper and a pen, and just write down, what are the positive habits that I have? What are the habits that I have that are moving me towards the future that I want? What are the habits that I have that are not moving me towards the future that I want? And what habits should I have? So you should have 3 categories of habits that you analyze after you've tracked. You should have good habits, bad habits, and new habits that you should have in your life. And then what you're going to do is you're going to use the practice of understanding your cue, your routine, and your reward, of understanding your habits to slowly, one at a time, no more than one, every 60 days until you get into the habit of changing your habits. Replace those bad habits with the healthy habits on the should be list, and find ways of reinforcing your good habits. Continue to get that cue, routine, reward, so that way you instinctually do all these things. Again, this is important because it means that you can be more efficient and effective with your time. This means that you can be more intentional about your future. There's so many reasons why you want to take the time to do this. So this is just kind of a high level overview of how you can begin to shape your habits towards the future of your dreams. So again, I want to ask you the question: how do you spend your time? What things in your life are habitual? What things do you do instinctually? What things require thought? What things in your life could you simplify if you made them a habit rather than having to use your finite amount of willpower every day to execute on them? What are your highest priorities? We're going to talk about values very soon, because values, again, your time is a reflection of your values. When you get done, if you decide to go, and again, I would encourage everybody to do that, the route of writing everything down that you do, just again, in hour-long blocks, what you got done in that hour and what you spent your time on. If you decide to go down that route, you're going to get a really good reflection of what your values are in practicality. Because we have values that we have here in our heads, and then we have values that actually live themselves out through our lives. Like I said, I value getting up early and having my morning, but is that reflected in my behavior? Do I actually get up early and do the things that empower me to have the kind of morning I want to have? Your values, as you write down your habits, you'll begin to see your values as they are lived out in your life, not necessarily as they are in your head and your heart. And so part of that, what you should and should not be doing from a habit perspective, also comes back to getting in check with your values and your vision. So where are your habits contradicting your values? Where are your habits contradicting your vision for your future? So again, just to recap on the topic of habits, you've got to bring awareness to them, because so many of your habits you're unaware of. Some of them you're very well aware of. You got to learn to be honest with yourself about those habits too, right? I'm just as guilty. I love to sleep in. Getting in a routine where I get up at the same time every morning is the biggest struggle in the world for me, because I'm a sleeper. I love to sleep. But I also know this: discipline equals freedom. And so if you just Jocko Willink taught me this. If you just get up at the same time every day, whether you like it or not, it becomes habitual and it's easy. It makes it easier. Then I don't have to use willpower to get my feet on the ground every day. So track your time. Again, you've got a tool you can download at tianashoei.com in resources, or it should be here in the notes, the show notes of the podcast or the blog. If you're watching I guess it's a vlog, a video blog, or if you're watching the video version of this on YouTube, I have a link to the document you can download, and it's a simple tool where you can just quickly scribble in what you've done every hour and pay attention to your habits. Or if you're going to pick a single habit, get a little notepad and write down every time you do that thing. If you're wasting time on your phone, which we all do, by the way, I'm going to talk a lot about how I've revamped my phone time. So that way my phone is a tool and it does not drive me, but I drive it. And I have reduced my screen time significantly by becoming, again, aware of how many times I pick up my phone, or how many times I spend money frivolously because I get bored or I'm stressed out. So I get on Amazon and I go buy something, right? So you're going to pick that habit and you're going to write it down. And then you're going to figure out, just for one habit, what your cue, routine, reward is. You're going to learn to understand how you tick, what your cues, your routines, and your rewards are. Then you're going to pick one habit that you want to change into something from it should be on your list habit. Maybe that's drinking enough water every day. Maybe it's saying, okay, you know what? I have a habit of drinking 4 cups of coffee in the morning and no water. By the way, that is so bad for your body. That is so bad for your body. The first thing you should do before you put anything else in your body is drink water. That is like rule number 1. Drink water first thing in the morning. Do not put coffee. Do not anything else. Drink water. Give your body water first thing in the morning. So maybe you're going to say, I'm going to change my 4 cup of coffee habit into a 3 cup of coffee habit, and I'm going to start off with a cup of water first. Whatever that looks like for you, start small. And if you want to change that 4 cup of coffee habit, for example, into a 1 cup of coffee habit, work your way into it. Give yourself a full 2-3 months, if that's how long it's going to take, to wean yourself down. So don't try to do too much too soon. Pick something small. Identify that cue, routine, reward by identifying the time of the day that your habit is triggered, the people around you, your emotional state, and your immediately preceding action. You can write all this down as you're writing down your habit. And then figure out a way that you're going to be successful in replacing one of your shouldn't be on your habit list with something that should be on your habit list, one at a time for 66 days. Again, I use the 66 days because from several different books that I've read, that's about the consensus on the time it takes to truly change a habit, because there's several parts of your brain that need to be reformed in order to get a habit into your basal ganglia and flowing through your limbic brain the way that it should. You don't decide your future. Your habits decide your future, and you decide your habit. And again, as Charles says, this is the real power of habit, the insight that your habits are what you choose them to be. And just to reinforce that, luck equals preparation, which is your personal growth, plus your attitude, which is your mindset, plus opportunity, plus action, which are your choices and your habits. That's what luck boils down to. You have the power to have a life that you love. It's at your fingertips. I'm telling you, I know how scary it is. I've had to walk away from the way that I thought life should be to embark on a journey that is uniquely my own. And it requires courage, it requires humility, it requires discipline, and it requires a focused mindset on learning, a growth mindset on learning. But the other side of all of the fear and the other side of all of the bad decisions and the other side of deciding that I wasn't going to believe in unhealthy beliefs about myself or about the way the world works any longer is freedom. And there's something, one thing I love about being in this country is that we value freedom above all else. And that's really, kind of the foundation of this country is freedom. And there's so much, freedom is such a beautiful thing because it means that you get to truly be who you are. It means that you get to live the life of your dreams. As long as you're obviously not hurting other people and doing terrible things with your freedom. Hopefully that goes unsaid. But I truly, genuinely believe that part of why people make bad decisions in life is because they feel trapped into making bad decisions. They believe lies about who they are. They believe lies about how the world works. And so a lot of people just give up and say, if this is what life is, then I'm just going to go the easiest route. And I can tell you that life is not perfect. Like I said, do you love your life? I didn't ask if your life was perfect. I asked you if you loved your life. I can't promise you a perfect life, but I can promise you a set of tools. I can promise to give you and share with you the principles and the things that I've learned that will set you on a path where you can love your life, where you can know how to manage difficult circumstances when they come in your way. Because by the way, every single person on this planet is going to be faced with something difficult at some point in time, if not on a regular basis. And I would love to be able to inspire you to see that you don't have to settle in your life. You really do not have to settle. If you're settling in any area in your life, it's because you believe you've got to, I would say in most cases, you've probably got a fixed mindset and you believe that you're capable of less than you really are. And I would love to inspire you to see that you're capable of more than you are. I know for those of you who've known me for a long time, it would be hard for you, almost inconceivable to believe that I struggled so much with confidence and self-worth for such a long time. I was the kind of person who could get up on a stage and talk to 400 people. I've done that many times. I've had the opportunity to get up on a stage and talk to hundreds of different people and give a presentation. And buried in underneath that was so much insecurity, so much fear. And I'm no longer going to feel like I have to have these two people, this dichotomy that I'm balancing between the real me and the version of me that everybody sees. I'm trying to merge those two by being genuine, honest, and authentic with everyone. And part of that authenticity is admitting, I know what it's like to be scared. I know what it's like to feel like you have imposter syndrome. I know what it's like to be insecure. I know what it's like to think, where's the money going to come from to pay the bills this month? I know what it's like to believe that going and working your 9 to 5 is the best course of action. But I can tell you on the other side of that if you learn to make good decisions in your life, that you can free yourself from so many of the constraints that we believe about how life works. Life is such a big and beautiful and wonderful thing. I just really don't want you to get to the end of your life like we talked about in the Vision podcast and have any of those 5 regrets of the dying. We can avoid those if we start to use intentionality now. And thinking about your habits is one of those big pieces. So I am way over the time I said I was going to be, but this is why I had to break this into a 2-part series. Just wanted to give you a little bit more color around it too. Just, put this all in perspective. That's why I'm doing this podcast. That's why I'm going on this journey, because I genuinely believe that you have something unique and special to bring to this planet. And I want to see it. I selfishly want to see as many people free and using the amazing gifts and talents that you have that are unique to you. So thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. Again, if you like this content, if you feel like you know anybody else who may enjoy joining us on this journey, please be sure to tell them about it. Again, you can find all the information on my website at tianashoei.com. Please be sure to leave a review, subscribe, come back and listen to future episodes. And in the next episode, I actually have my first guest speaker. So that's coming up for episode 8. I'm looking forward to releasing that. And I hope to have more guest speakers in future episodes. And I am also working on adding some little small blitz episodes in there. So one thing at a time. As I said before, I'm not gonna throw a handful of pebbles. I'm working on one thing at a time. So as I improve the quality, for those of you who watch on video, I'm still working on the background. I apologize. This is my office, my home office. So you're getting to see the raw, real version of me. But I am working on improving the background and audio quality and all those fun things about learning how to have a podcast. So thank you for sticking in there with me early on. And I look forward to going on this journey with you. Thank you again. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And this has been Tiana Shoei. Ain't quite right. Thank you for tuning in. For additional content, including my blog and social media, see my website, tianashoei.com. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe, leave a review, and be sure to tell your friends and family, anyone else that you think might enjoy joining us on this journey. Until next time.